All right, strap in, everybody. Today, we are taking a deep dive into an essay called Forgiveness in the Exercise of Spiritual Power.
Ooh, just the title alone.
I know, right?
Higgsy Fang.
It really sets the stage for some deep thinking.
Yeah.
And, the essay, it looks at these intense stories from the Bible. Figures like Elisha, Peter, even Jesus. And it asks a really powerful question.
Yeah.
Does absolute power, even when it comes from God, corrupt?
That is the question, isn't it? The essay, it really tackles it head on. The core argument, if you will, is that, even though God can bestow this incredible power on people, we as humans, we're inherently flawed. We make mistakes, we misinterpret things, and sometimes we just straight up misuse the power that we're given.
Okay, so right away, this essay is making me think about human nature and how it plays into even our most spiritual experiences. Where does it go from there?
Well, he starts with a story about the prophet Elisha. Now, you probably know Elisha for his miracles and his wisdom, but this particular story, it's a little more jarring.
Oh, lay it on me. I'm ready for a curveball.
So the essay describes how Elisha cursed a group of children, sending bears to maul them to death.
Hold on.
All because they were mocking his baldness.
Elisha, a prophet of God, did that.
Yeah.
That seems pretty harsh, even for biblical time.
Yeah, it's a challenging story for sure. And the author used it to really highlight how even those who are closest to God can misinterpret and misapply divine power, right? But what's really fascinating here is that the essay goes beyond just retelling the story. It really encourages you to think about how we interpret these ancient texts. Some scholars actually argue that the word children in this passage, it might have been mistranslated, and that the people that Elisha cursed weren't actually kids, but rather young men who were posing a real threat to him.
No. So there's this whole layer of interpretation and context that we need to consider, even with these seemingly straightforward biblical narratives.
Exactly. And the essay really emphasizes that point. It's reminding you to always be aware of the potential for translation errors and the importance of considering different perspectives when you're reading these ancient texts.
That's a great reminder, especially when you're dealing with stories that have been passed down through centuries and translated multiple times. It makes you wonder how much nuance might have been lost or misinterpreted along the way.
For sure. And speaking of misinterpretations, the essay then shifts gears to focus on another biblical figure, the Apostle Peter.
Okay, I'm sensing another thought-provoking story coming on. What did Peter do?
The essay dives into the story of Ananias and Sapphira, this couple who were struck dead for lying to Peter about a financial contribution they made to that really Christian community.
Okay, that's intense. What does the essay say about Peter's actions? Was he justified in invoking such a severe punishment?
Well, this is where the essay gets really interesting. The author suggests that Peter, while acting out of zeal for the truth, might have let his human judgment kind of override divine mercy, right? Remember we were talking about how human nature can sometimes distort the exercise of spiritual power.
Right, so you're saying that Peter, despite his good intentions, might have overstepped in his judgment.
Exactly. And the author makes this really interesting connection here to the concept of sin against the Holy Spirit. It's a complex idea, but essentially the author is hinting at the possibility that Peter's actions, fueled by his own human emotions, might have led to a harsher outcome than God might have intended.
And that's a really powerful point. It makes you wonder about the line between righteous judgment and letting human flaws cloud our spiritual decisions.
And it leads us to an even bigger question. What does true spiritual power really look like?
Ooh, now you're really getting to the heart of it. Is this where Jesus comes in?
It is. The essay contrasts Elisha and Peter, who both seem to falter in their use of spiritual power, with Jesus, who represents the ultimate example of forgiveness.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into that. What makes Jesus' approach to power so different?
Well, the essay highlights Jesus' teachings on forgiveness, especially his instruction to forgive 77 times. Now, this wasn't just a random number, right? It was a metaphorical way of saying that forgiveness should be limitless, offered unconditionally and constantly.
That's always stood out to me, that idea of boundless forgiveness. It goes against everything our human nature tells us to do.
Exactly. And the author points out how Jesus, through his words and actions, challenged those deeply ingrained instincts for revenge and retaliation. To illustrate this, they bring up the parable of the unforgiving servant. Do you remember that one?
Yes, the one where the king forgives this massive debt.
Right.
But then the servant refuses to forgive a much smaller debt owed to him. What a powerful lesson about hypocrisy and the importance of extending the same grace we receive.
It's brilliant, isn't it? The author uses this parable to highlight the hypocrisy of seeking forgiveness from God while withholding it from others. And to really drive home the radical nature of Jesus' teachings on forgiveness, they point you to the Sermon on the Mount, specifically Matthew 5:39 to 45, where Jesus calls us to turn the other cheek, love our enemies, and pray for those who persecute us.
And those are some challenging teachings. I can see how they would have been revolutionary at the time, and frankly, they're still challenging for most of us today.
What's fascinating is that the author then connects these radical teachings to other philosophical and spiritual traditions throughout history that emphasize forgiveness as a path to personal and societal transformation. It's like this idea resonates across cultures and time periods.
It's like the author is saying that forgiveness isn't just a religious concept,
Yeah,
but a universal principle for a better way of being.
that's a great way to put it. And to really bring it home, the essay then describes how Jesus himself lived out these teachings, even in the face of extreme adversity. He didn't retaliate when people call him names or accused him falsely. And the author culminates this exploration with Jesus' prayer on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do."
That's always been such a powerful image for me, that even in his final moments, Jesus was choosing forgiveness over judgment.
It's a stunning testament to the transformative power of forgiveness and the depth of Jesus' love and compassion. And the essay uses this as a perfect segue to introduce another compelling figure, Stephen, a deacon in the early church.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about Stephen and how he fits into all of this.
Stephen was known for his faith and powerful preaching, but tragically, he was falsely accused and sentenced to death by stoning. And if in that moment of extreme injustice, facing his own mortality, that Stephen does something truly remarkable.
I'm on the edge of my seat. What did he do?
As the stones rained down on him, instead of crying out for vengeance or cursing his attackers, Stephen prayed, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them."
Wow. Talk about walking the walk. You need to be facing death and still choose forgiveness. That's a level of spiritual strength I can hardly fathom.
It's an incredible display of forgiveness and faith. And the essay delves into the concept of martyrdom across different religions and how Stephen's unwavering faith and composure make him such a compelling figure. And what's even more powerful is that Stephen's act of forgiveness didn't end with his death.
Wait, there's more. I'm already blown away by Stephen's story.
His prayer actually had a ripple effect that changed the course of history. The essay explained how a man named Saul, who was present at Stephen's stoning and even participated in it, was deeply affected by Stephen's words and actions.
Wait a minute. Is this the same Saul who later became the Apostle Paul?
The one and only. Witnessing Stephen's unwavering faith and forgiveness planted a seed in Saul that would eventually lead to his conversion and his pivotal role in spreading Christianity.
Wow, so Stephen's act of forgiveness didn't just save his own soul. It potentially saved countless others by influencing Paul's journey. That's a powerful illustration of how, even in the darkest moments, forgiveness can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond what we can imagine.
It's a beautiful example of how one act of radical forgiveness can have unimaginable consequences. And it brings us back to the author's core argument. True spiritual power lies not in judgment and retribution, but in forgiveness and love.
Okay, now it's all starting to click into place. The essay is contrasting these different approaches to power, showing how those who wielded it with anger or judgment ultimately faltered, while those who embraced forgiveness created a ripple effect of transformation and healing.
You got it. And the author uses a really striking metaphor to emphasize this point. They compared the Bible to a two-edged sword.
Okay, I'm listening. What's the significance of the two-edged sword?
Well, it means that the Bible, like any powerful tool, can be used for both good and evil, all right, depending on the intent of the wielder. It's a reminder that interpretation is key, and that even the most secret teachings can be twisted to justify harmful actions.
That's a powerful image and a sobering reminder that spiritual power, like any kind of power, requires wisdom and discernment. It makes you wonder.
What does it make you wonder?
Well, how often do we, even with the best intentions, misinterpret or misuse the teachings that are meant to guide us towards a better path?
That's a profound question, and one that the author encourages you to consider.
And it makes me want to ask you, what does the author say about how we can avoid those pitfalls? How can we make sure we're wielding spiritual power in a way that aligns with true forgiveness and love?
Great question. To answer that, we'll need to dive a bit deeper into the author's final thoughts on this complex topic. Ready for part 2 of our deep dive?
Absolutely. Let's keep exploring.
Picking up where we left off, the author poses this really fascinating question about Jesus and his power.
Oh, ammo layers.
They point out that despite possessing this immense spiritual power, think healing the sick, even raising the dead, Jesus never used it to kill anyone.
Now that you mention it, that's a striking observation. It's not like he lacked opportunities or reasons, especially given all the conflict he faced.
Exactly. And the author highlights how Jesus' power consistently flowed towards those life-giving actions, right? Forgiveness, compassion, offering a path to eternal life.
So the essay is suggesting that true spiritual power might be less about brute force and more about, bestowing life. That's a pretty radical idea, especially considering how we often equate power with dominance.
It is radical.
Yeah.
And it directly challenges those traditional notions. The author seems to be saying that love and forgiveness, not might or control, are the most potent forces in the universe. It's almost like turning the concept of power on its head.
That's a lot to unpack, and I have to admit it's making me reevaluate some of my own assumptions about power. What does the author say about how we can tap into that kind of power in our own lives?
Well, they leave us with a final, incredibly thought-provoking question. For you, Khanda, you hit me with it. I'm ready for some serious introspection. They ask, what is the most powerful way to wield spiritual power in your own life?
Well, that's a big one. It's not just about these abstract concepts anymore. It's about looking inward and examining how we express our own spirituality, right?
Exactly. It challenges us to think beyond seeking power over others, and instead consider how we can use our influence to uplift and empower those around us. It's about recognizing that divine spark within ourselves and nurturing it in others through love, compassion, and yes, forgiveness.
It strikes me that this entire deep dive has been about shifting perspectives. We started by looking at how human fallibility can lead even those with spiritual authority astray. Then we explored the radical forgiveness embodied by Jesus and Stephen, and now we're being asked to consider what true spiritual power looks like in our everyday lives.
And that's the beauty of this essay. It doesn't just offer a historical or theological analysis. It invites you to actively engage with these ideas and see how they resonate with your own beliefs and experiences.
It's like we've gone from unpacking biblical stories to unpacking our own understanding of power and forgiveness.
And that unpacking, that willingness to question and explore, is at the heart of what makes this deep dive so valuable. It's about taking these complex ideas and allowing them to spark a personal transformation.
I think that's a great point to pause on for a moment. This deep dive has been packed with insights and challenging questions, and I bet our listeners are already doing some deep thinking of their own. Shall we take a breath and then come back to wrap things up?
Sounds like a plan. Give yourself a moment to digest all this. We'll be back in a flash to tie it all together.
All right, so let's bring this deep dive home. We've covered a lot of ground here, from Elijah's curse to Stephen's prayer. It feels like this essay is building towards a really powerful conclusion, right?
It really is. And it all comes back to that central question we keep coming back to.
Yeah.
What does it truly mean to wield spiritual power? The author seems to be suggesting that it's less about these outward displays of authority and more about this inner transformation, particularly through forgiveness.
That's been a recurring theme throughout this whole conversation. This contrast between force and forgiveness. The author seems to be advocating for a more nuanced understanding of power, one that's rooted in compassion and love.
Exactly. And they use those biblical stories like Elisha and Peter to highlight how even those chosen by God can stumble when their human flaws overshadow their spiritual understanding. It's like a cautionary tale almost, reminding you that true spiritual power isn't about wielding judgment or seeking retribution.
Instead, it seems like the author is pointing us towards the example of Jesus, who consistently chose forgiveness over retaliation, even in the face of, extreme suffering.
Right. The essay highlights how Jesus, even though he possessed this immense power, never used it to harm or punish. His focus was always on healing, restoring, and offering a path to redemption. It's a radical departure from those traditional notions of power as dominance or control.
And it's not just Jesus. We also talked about Stephen, who chose to forgive his murderers even as they were stoning him to death. Talk about it, a testament to the transformative power of forgiveness.
It is an incredible story, and it really underscores the author's point that true spiritual power lies in transcending our human limitations and acting with this level of compassion that reflects, the divine.
It makes you wonder, right, if we often just misinterpret what real power looks like. We tend to associate it with these outward displays of force or authority, but maybe it's something much deeper and more subtle.
That's a really profound insight, and it ties into the author's comparison of the Bible to a two-edged sword. It's this reminder that spiritual teachings, like any powerful tool, can be misused or misinterpreted, leading to harmful consequences.
It's like this call to be mindful of our own interpretations, to make sure we're not twisting those teachings to justify our own biases or desires.
And ultimately, it's about allaying our actions with the true spirit of forgiveness and love, as exemplified by Jesus and Stephen. That's where the real power lies. The power to heal, to transform, and to create a more compassionate and just world.
This deep dive has been a real journey.
Yeah.
And I think the author's final question, the one about how we wield spiritual power in our own lives, it's the perfect challenge to leave our listeners with.
It really is a question that goes beyond this intellectual understanding, and invites you to put these ideas into practice. It's about examining your own choices, your reactions, your interactions with others. And asking yourself, am I embodying the kind of power that leads to healing and connection, or am I perpetuating these cycles of hurt and division?
That's a really powerful way to frame it. And it's a reminder that true spiritual growth isn't a passive process. It's an active choice we make every day.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to sit with those questions and reflect on the stories we've discussed, the challenges they present, and the transformative power of forgiveness.
And think about how you can bring those lessons to life in your own unique way.
Remember, true spiritual power isn't about controlling others. It's about mastering yourself.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of forgiveness and spiritual power. Until next time, keep diving deep. Hey, you made it this far, so thank you for watching. Please support the work of this channel. Like this video and share. Subscribe to get notified when new videos are posted. I would like to know your thoughts on this topic. Please share them in the comment section. We can learn and grow together. If you have a topic you would want us to discuss, please send us an email. God bless you.